and welcome to another episode of Accessibility. It's a show on YouTube where I talk about the video game industry, accessibility, and representation. Basically, how can we help more people to play games, and more people to see themselves in the games they play? I'm Laura, a white woman with bright blue hair, shaved on one side, wearing a black and galaxy pattern dress. Over the past few years, we have seen a drastic increase in the video game industry, in the number of games that ship with dedicated accessibility menus. They're far from a standard in our industry, but they used to be a real rarity, and now they're a lot less surprising when you see them. They're still not common, but they're a lot more common than they used to be. However, where and how accessibility menus are presented to players can in many ways be just as important as their inclusion in games themselves. So today, on Accessibility, we're going to talk about the importance of accessibility settings menu placement. We're going to talk about some of the benefits that come when you make your settings menus upfront and difficult to avoid. We're going to talk about some of the drawbacks when you hide them a couple of menu settings deep. And we're going to talk about possibly the most important accessibility setting to have come up right at the start of your game before anything else. Most of the time, when video games include accessibility settings, they're presented to players as dedicated accessibility options in their own menu, inside a larger settings menu. It's good that these settings exist in these games, but let's talk a little bit about the drawbacks of this approach. Firstly, players may not know instantly that these settings are on offer. This may seem obvious, but accessibility settings are not yet so common that every gamer assumes that every game has an accessibility menu to go and find. By making accessibility settings not nested inside other settings menus, you're more likely to let people know that your game has those settings up front. Secondly, there's a subset of people who don't want to think of accommodations they might find helpful as accessibility settings. There's a percentage of people out there who would benefit from accessibility support but are unlikely to click on an accessibility menu that they see on a pause screen or on a start screen to see that there are useful and desirable settings inside. A solution to both of these is highlighting accessibility settings on a player's first boot up of a game as a mandatory part of onboarding. Look at a game like The Last of Us 2, for example, which on first boot up walks players through a series of accessibility menus before the game begins. This shows the player that these accessibility settings exist if they need them, either now or later, as well as showing players who might, due to pride, not look in an accessibility menu, what settings are available, so they can learn if anything useful exists for them without having to go out of their way or get over that pride barrier. By taking the barriers of having to know these settings exist and having to feel willing to look through them, you have a much better chance of more people finding the settings they need. Additionally, you avoid situations where a player might hit start on a game, realise they didn't turn on subtitles for example, and can't engage with the game's opening cutscene. By making sure a player's settings are correct up front, you don't risk the start of their play experience being negatively impacted. While I am a big believer generally that including accessibility settings on first boot up of a game is generally beneficial, there is one setting in particular that I believe needs to be a priority, and should be the first setting presented to the player before any game starts if that game supports it. Text-to-speech menu narration. If your game supports text-to-speech narration, where the game will verbally tell blind or partially sighted players what text is currently selected in menus, that needs to be turned on by default and the first thing that comes up on screen when the game boots up. Have the game ask the player, out loud, if they would like that setting turned on or off. By having that setting up front and left to the player to opt out of if they don't want it, rather than needing to find it and opt into it, you make the entire rest of your accessibility setting onboarding process much more accessible. While I am incredibly happy to see more video games including more accessibility settings options, I want them to be more forthright about that. I would love to get to a world where every time you boot up a new game for the first time, it takes you straight to the accessibility options. It lets you know what's there, it lets you pick what you want to use, and then you get into the game. It's a very short delay, but it could really help a lot of people to see what settings are available and know that things might be helpful to them. For accessibility settings to be as useful as possible, players need to know upfront what settings are available and that there's settings available in the first place. If there are players who fail to find your accessibility settings, or players who could make use of those settings but don't know that they need them because they wouldn't think to look in accessibility, that's people who you've made settings for that could really help them, who simply aren't going to know that that help is there.